My father's an anchorman. And when I was raised by my parents, my dad said, I don't give a shit what you do in life. I don't care.
Before the cameras started rolling, before the gasps echoed through the courtroom, and before a single word was spoken, Hollywood held its breath. He wasn't a whistleblower. He wasn't a bitter has-been. He was George Clooney Oscar winner humanitarian, icon of charm and grace. And when he walked into that courtroom on day 17 of the Diddy trial, everything changed. This wasn't some tabloid scandal or clickbait drama. It was a reckoning, a slow, shattering collapse of an illusion the world had worshipped for decades. And Clooney. He wasn't there to save anyone. He was there to confess. What he revealed wasn't just a story about one man. It wasn't even about Diddy. It was about the machine. The real Hollywood, not the red carpets, not the premieres, but the rituals that unfold in the shadows beneath the theme parks. Families visit guarded by smiles and billion-dollar contracts. Clooney had seen it. He had walked into the cave, and for years he stayed silent. But silence, he said, is how monsters thrive. This wasn't just testimony, it was a warning. And once you hear what he said, you'll never look at fame the same way again. The tension in the courtroom was already thick when the judge called for the next witness. Journalists whispered. Predictions. Another record executive, maybe a disgruntled former bodyguard. No one expected the door to open and reveal a man whose face was etched into the global consciousness. A hush fell over the room like a curtain dropping. Even the stenographer paused, her fingers frozen mid-keystroke. There he stood. George Clooney, dressed in a stark black suit, jaw, clenched eyes, unreadable. Not the charming movie star, not the humanitarian hosting global summits. This Clooney was different. He walked like a man carrying something heavy, not in his hands, but in his soul. Some thought it was a mistake, a publicity stunt. But the gravity in his posture said otherwise. He wasn't here for a headline. He was here to unburden the truth. He refused to look at Diddy as he approached the stand. Cameras weren't allowed. But the silence inside that room spoke louder than any photograph. Every journalist, every juror, every person who had watched this trial unfold suddenly understood. They weren't witnessing another celebrity cameo. They were watching a system crack open. Clooney's first words were quiet but deliberate. I never imagined I'd be here, he said. But there are things I've seen, things I can't carry anymore. He wasn't vague, he wasn't evasive. He went straight into it, recounting the early invitations that came wrapped in glamour, lavish retreats, Vipanli parties, the kind of access that only a select few ever receive. It felt like being invited into a secret fraternity. He said, exclusive, mysterious, intoxicating. When Diddy invites you, you show up. That's just how it works in their world. But then the invitations got stranger. Private coordinates, odd hours, a dress code of silence and shadows. At first, Clooney thought it was a prank A-game, but he went anyway. Curiosity outweighed caution. What he walked into, though, was not a party. It was a ritual, a ceremony cloaked in power, secrecy, and silent obedience. He didn't name names. Not yet, but he dropped the first hint of what was really happening behind the velvet curtain of fame, a network of the elite, protected not by law but by mutual silence. You weren't just there to enjoy the night, he said. You were there to be seen. That's how they made sure. No one ever talked mutual destruction. Mutual guilt. This wasn't about wild celebrity parties, it was about something darker, something ritualized, systematic, and chillingly organized, and Clooney, he was done pretending it didn't exist. As he spoke, it became clear this wasn't just testimony. It was the start of something much bigger. The trial may have had Diddy's name on it, but what Clooney brought into that courtroom threatened to drag the entire industry into the light. And this was only the beginning. It started with an envelope. No return address, no note, just a sleek black card with nothing but a time and GPS coordinates printed in silver ink. The time, 2:00 a.m. The coordinates pointed to a parking structure adjacent to one of America's most beloved theme parks, a place millions of families visited each year. It felt like a joke. But then came the message from an unknown number. Follow the instructions. Wear black. No phone. Clooney hesitated. But in his world, curiosity was currency, and Diddy's circle wasn't something you questioned. It was something you obeyed. He wore black. He left his phone. He arrived at the location where a black SUV waited in silence. The driver never spoke. They wound through empty back streets and dim industrial corridors until they pulled into an underground lot. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then Clooney was guided through a service tunnel marked "Staff Only." A steel door slid open, and what lay beyond shattered any sense of familiarity. A winding concrete corridor stretched ahead, humming with flickering fluorescent lights. The walls dripped with condensation. At least 3 security checkpoints stood between Clooney and what came next, each guarded by cold-eyed men who didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They already knew who he was. The final door was a reinforced metal hatch. When it opened, it hissed like a vault being breached, and what lay beyond wasn't a basement. It was a world beneath the world. A vast underground chamber opened up before him, carved into bedrock and bathed in soft ambient lighting. Music pulsed faintly in the background, a low throb like a distant heartbeat. Clooney described the space as surreal, luxurious, and terrifying. All at once, politicians, athletes, musicians' faces he recognized stood dressed in robes, sipping from gold-plated goblets, laughing too easily. But the laughter didn't reach their eyes. Then he saw them. People with no arms, no legs. Some were propped on velvet pillows. Others wheeled in and out like decor. And yet no one stared. No one flinched. These individuals were called nuggets, spoken of with a casual tone, as if they were a category, not human beings. It was the word everyone used. Clooney, recalled like it meant nothing. They weren't observers. They were centerpieces. He said he asked someone what was going on. The answer came with a smirk. Don't worry. They volunteered. It's part of the fun. But Clooney didn't laugh. He didn't feel entertained. He felt sick. Before anyone could proceed deeper into the chamber, guests were required to sign thick NDAs documents enforced not by lawyers, but by private intelligence contractors. He refused. And rather than being escorted, out he was taken to a side lounge. There behind glass, he watched. What he saw, he said, still wakes him up at night. The cave wasn't a myth. It was real. And it was built not for pleasure, but for power. Clooney sat alone in the glass-walled lounge, a crystal tumbler of whiskey trembling in his hand. On the other side of the glass, the ceremony continued, celebrities he once respected parading through the chamber like it was a scene from a surreal opera. There were no cameras, no phones, no names. Only masks, robes, and a silent understanding that whatever happened in the cave never made it above ground. He couldn't process what he was seeing. Some of the nuggets were blindfolded. Others were being passed around, admired, spoken to as if they weren't real. Not once did Clooney see fear in the eyes of the participants, only comfort, as though this grotesque ritual was just another night out. They said it was voluntary. Clooney told the court, his voice low. They said those people wanted to be there, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like a choice. No one explained why they were there. No one asked. Because asking was dangerous. You didn't question the rituals. You didn't show discomfort. If you did, you were out, and being out meant exile not from a friend group, but from Hollywood itself. Before anyone entered the inner circle, Clooney revealed they were required to sign a non-disclosure agreement the size of a novella. He recognized the emblem stamped on it. Belonged to a powerful private intelligence firm known for suppressing scandals and eliminating leaks. If you didn't sign, you didn't go in. That's how they got everyone, he said. That's how they made sure no one ever talked, but Clooney didn't sign. He didn't step into the ritual chamber, and that decision, he would learn, carried its own price. Instead of being ejected, he was silently escorted to the lounge where outsiders were kept. Those not trusted, not fully initiated, but too powerful to cast aside without care. And from there he watched as people he admired became unrecognizable. I saw them laughing, drinking, performing like they'd done this 100 times before, he said. And the nuggets, they weren't props. They were part of it. The point of it. He couldn't tell whether he was meant to feel envy or horror. But one thing became clear. This was no isolated event. It wasn't a one-time slip into darkness. It was a pattern. An institution cloaked in secrecy, powered by fear and enforced by silence. Later that night, as he left the cave, no one stopped him. No one threatened him, but they didn't need to. Because what he'd seen was enough to haunt him, enough to warn him, enough to keep him quiet, for a while. At first, Clooney thought he could move on. He hadn't participated. He hadn't signed anything. He hadn't crossed the invisible line. But Hollywood doesn't work like that. You don't just walk away from the cave. You drift slowly, quietly, into a different kind of exile. Phone calls that used to be returned in minutes began going unanswered. Projects that were once greenlit with a handshake suddenly stalled with no explanation. A director he'd collaborated with for years ghosted. Their multi-film deal vanished without so much as a phone call. On the surface, everything looked normal, but beneath it the wires had been cut. Nothing was said out loud, Clooney told the court. But the silence was deafening. It was subtle, coordinated and surgical. He wasn't blacklisted in any official capacity, but doors that had once flung open were now barely cracked. The press grew colder, studio meetings got shorter, trusted allies became distant, and no one ever said why. That's how the machine works. It doesn't threaten you. It forgets you. Quietly, efficiently, completely. He learned of others who had suffered the same fate. An actor known in every household once confided in him about attending one of Diddy's underground gatherings. He stayed. Too long saw too much spoke to the wrong person. A week later, tabloids exploded with false accusations, scandal after scandal. Within months, the actor's career evaporated. It was too perfect, Clooney said. Too clean, too coordinated to be coincidence. No violence, no confrontation, just erasure, strategic silence, and carefully placed rumors. Clooney began keeping a journal every time a project was pulled, every unexplained meeting cancellation, every cryptic warning from PR firms urging him to distance himself from certain names. Every moment where it felt like an invisible hand was tightening around his career, he documented it all. Because I knew what this was, he said. I just didn't know how far it reached. But what disturbed him most wasn't what happened to him. It was what he saw happening to everyone else. Promising actors, up-and-coming directors, people with real talent who had made the wrong decision, refused the wrong invitation, or whispered to the wrong person, and just like that, they were gone. Their shows were canceled, their music shelved, their reputations left to rot in silence. And through it all, Diddy's name was never mentioned. Not once, not directly. Because in Hollywood, power doesn't need to shout. It whispers. And those who know how to listen understand what's really being said. I realized I was still George Clooney, he told the jury. But something had shifted. I was breathing different air. Thinner, colder. He wasn't out. He was marked, and the scariest part, no one had to say a word to make it happen. The moment came in a flash, quiet but unforgettable. Clooney was standing near the chamber's entrance, flanked by masked elites and the hum of ambient music when he saw it, a podium, small, unassuming. But on top of it sat something chilling in its simplicity. A guest book, not digital, not hidden. Just a thick leather-bound ledger resting like it belonged in a hotel lobby. Every person who entered the cave, he said, had to sign it. There was no security code, no fingerprint scan, just a signature, a name, a mark of consent. Clooney didn't sign. He hadn't passed through the ritual threshold, but he'd stood close enough to glimpse a few of the names already inked onto the page. And what he saw, he said, would shake the average American household to its core. I remember a few of them, he told the court. Names you'd never associate with something like this. People whose entire careers were built on trust, on charity, on family, friendly, brands. He didn't speak the names out loud. Not yet. But he made one thing brutally clear. This wasn't a room full of washed-up celebrities or obscure billionaires. This was a curated list of power, the kind that shapes headlines, shifts elections, and scripts culture. There were tech moguls, elected officials, Oscar winners, heads of major studios, people who shaped what the public believed about decency, morality, and truth. They weren't hiding, Clooney said. They were performing for each other. Because that's what made this dangerous. You weren't just there to indulge, you were there to be seen indulging. That was the real design: mutual visibility, mutual silence. If everyone saw each other break the rules, no one could enforce them. If everyone sinned in the same room, no one could preach when they left. You didn't fear exposure, Clooney explained. You feared being the only one exposed. He described a lunch meeting. Weeks after the event, a powerful producer made a casual reference to nuggets, laughing like it was an inside joke. That's when it hit him. This wasn't a secret, it was an institution. He realized these events weren't rare, they were rotational. They operated on a schedule like a twisted calendar. Invitations flowed through invisible pipelines, NDAs were routine, and the people at the top had everything to lose by speaking and everything to gain by staying silent. The cave wasn't just a place, Clooney said. It was a gate. You walked in. One person and walked out owned. He said many weren't even lured by threats, but by promises, eternal relevance, guaranteed roles, blackmail-proof networks, unbreakable power. That guest book. It wasn't just a log, it was a ledger of compromise. And if the court ever opened those pages, the shock wouldn't just rattle. Hollywood, it would split America down the middle. It was late in 2015 when Clooney received a different kind of invitation. No gold foil, no GPS coordinates, just a sleek black card embossed with 3 silver words, only the initiated. There was no NDA to sign, no list of rules. Just an understanding. If you were invited to this, you were already owned. Clooney didn't plan to go. Something about it felt colder, more final. But a producer he trusted, someone he'd worked with for over a decade, called him personally. Everything's changing, the man whispered. You need to be there. So he went. From the moment he arrived, he could feel it. The energy had shifted, the usual. Smirks, the inside jokes, they were gone. In their place was tension, dread, purpose. The chamber was darker than before, the music more subdued. Clooney took his seat at the edge of the circle, unnoticed, watching. And then Diddy entered, all in white. 2 men flanked him, bald in sunglasses, their expressions unreadable. Clooney had never seen them before. No one spoke to them. Diddy stepped into the center of the mirrored chamber and raised a glass. Tonight, he said, we prove who belongs. The room fell still. A red light blinked on in the tinted booth above the surveillance booth. But this time the camera didn't just watch. A voice echoed through hidden speakers, low, distorted, inhuman, begin the choosing. What followed, Clooney said, was the most disturbing moment of his life. One by one, masked participants were ushered into the center of the circle. Some were celebrities, others were strangers. All of them were blindfolded, trembling. The voice asked them questions, not trivia, not politics. Personal questions, loyalty questions. What had they told their agents? Who had they spoken to? Did they ever speak against the circle? Those who hesitated or answered incorrectly were escorted through a side door. None of them came back. Don't know what happened to them, Clooney said. But within weeks, 3 people I recognized, people I'd seen at premieres on talk shows, disappeared from the public eye. No explanation, no scandals. Just gone. At one point, Clooney tried to leave. A guard stepped in front of him. Mr. Combs said you should stay, the man whispered. You're on the list. Clooney didn't argue. He sat back down, he stayed silent, and in doing so he passed, I felt like a prisoner, he told the court. And the only thing keeping me safe was my silence. He didn't move, he didn't speak, but something inside him broke that night. And he realized this wasn't about pleasure. It wasn't even about blackmail. It was about loyalty through fear. A test. No one was supposed to survive unless they played dead. And that night, George Clooney did just that. The flash drive arrived without fanfare, unassuming black rectangle, easily lost among the clutter of Daily Mail. But inside, it was a message no one could ignore. Clooney stared at the screen, the grainy surveillance footage flickering into view. The camera's night vision cast an eerie green tint over the dim cave interior. Shadows shifted along the rocky walls, but it was the figure in the center of the frame that froze him in place. Diddy calm, confident, and unsettlingly close. Diddy turned slowly, as if aware of the camera's gaze, then looked directly into the lens. A slow, deliberate smile stretched across his face, not friendly, but a clear message in itself. No words, no demands, just that smile. The unspoken threat: we're watching you. The footage wasn't just surveillance, it was a declaration. Clooney's heart pounded as the implication sank in. This wasn't a random act of intimidation. It was a calculated warning, the kind that demanded action or risk everything. Immediately, Clooney's world shifted. He went dark, vanishing from public view like a ghost. Phone lines went silent, meetings were canceled. The usual ease with which he moved through life was replaced by constant vigilance. His family, normally a source of joy, became the center of his protection plan. Clooney insisted they leave their homes, relocate to safe houses where security details were posted at every entrance. He hired teams with backgrounds in intelligence and personal protection, men and women who understood threats that came from shadows and silence. No detail was too small. Cameras installed, escape routes, mapped schedules, randomized. Every measure designed to guard against the eyes that now watched him. And as Clooney prepared for what he feared was inevitable, one thought lingered. This threat wasn't just personal. It was a message to anyone who dared challenge the unseen forces at play in the dark. Clooney waited ready to defend everything he loved against an enemy who had already crossed the line from warning to war. Clooney's voice dropped to a whisper, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the room. Silence is how monsters thrive. He said, his eyes never leaving the shadows beyond the window. It's the currency they deal in, the silence of those too afraid to speak, too scared to stand. He paused, letting the truth settle. Speaking out comes at a price one most never see, coming until it's too late. Families uprooted, reputations shredded, lives upended, but worse still, the isolation, the suffocating loneliness when the world turns away, because the truth is too dangerous to hear. What would you sacrifice to expose the truth? Clooney asked, not as a challenge, but as a warning. The cost isn't just personal, it ripples through everything you love. Sometimes it asks for more than you think you can give. The monsters don't just lurk in the dark corners, they blend into the brightest lights, the places we trust most. They wear masks of fame and power, moving silently behind the scenes, controlling stories, shaping realities. If Hollywood's brightest are involved, Clooney said, voice low, then who's left to trust? The question lingered long after the words faded, a quiet storm in the silence that followed. In the end, the greatest betrayal isn't the lies themselves, but the silence that allows them to live, grow, and destroy without consequence. And as the screen went dark, the audience was left with a haunting choice: stay silent and safe, or risk everything to pull back the curtain and face the monsters waiting in the shadows.